Cool. Well, thank you all for joining. Thank you for being here. I know there's a lot going on right now, so we really appreciate your time. Just a quick introduction. I'm Christy. I'm one of the co-directors for events of Out for Business. And Lizzie, Brian, did you want to introduce yourselves as well?
Sure. I'm Elizabeth Porter. I'm a co-director of events for Out for Business alongside Christy. I'm really happy to be here and really grateful for all of you being here as well. It's a stressful day. There's a lot going on, but I think it's good to carve out this time to just kind of focus on yourself and helping out others. So happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Brian. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm currently the executive director of Out for Business this year. And yeah, just want to echo what Lizzie was saying is that we're really grateful to have Lucas and Michael come share some really great insight. And we hope everybody's doing well today.
So as Brian said, we have Lucas and Michael here to present pretty much a general overview of this. We're just going to be talking about how we can create support for LGBTQ and unsupportive environments, how to deal with that stress, and also how allies can help in those situations. And just heads up, anybody who's business scholars, we will have passport points for that at the end, so just wait for that. And then Lucas, Michael, do you want to take it away?
Sure, yeah. Michael, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first, and then I'll kind of wrap up.
Sure. Tiali, naman no toka Michael. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael. I'm Shika, and I identify as queer in two-spirit. I use he, him, or they, them, their pronouns, and I am currently a psych intern here at the University of Utah doing my internship in counseling or in psychology at the University of Utah Counseling Center. And I'm really happy and honored to be here to share some information with you all today.
Yeah, and so my name's Luke Huckabee. I use he, him, his pronouns. Yeah, and I'm also, like Michael, a doctoral intern here at the University of Utah. Yeah, and also really excited to be here. So yeah, I think we'll go ahead and get ready to dive into the presentation. I think I also do want to note too on my end that I identify as straight, white, male, cisgender. And I want to just note those privileged identities, especially as we're approaching kind of this topic. So I do identify as an ally. But I do want to note some of those limitations in my own experience and understanding. And so with what we'll present, a lot of that I'm drawing kind of from the science of and from other discussions within the community. So, but I do want to note my positionality before we start. So we'll go ahead and dive in. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. We're going to start, we'd actually love to start from hearing from you all, just kind of about what are some of your concerns, especially as we're kind of approaching the break, going back potentially with families, not only at a time with COVID, but also at a time of other families' attitudes toward identities. So kind of want to get an idea of what your guys' concerns are to start, and then we'll kind of go into more of a didactic presentation, and then wrap up with an activity kind of built around trying to brainstorm resilience and safety, ideas for safety too. So yeah, so if you guys want to go ahead, this is, we're going to use Mentimeter, and this is my first time using it, but the code should be right up there at the top if you can all see it. And we'd really love to kind of hear from you all just about if you identify as LGBTQ, what are your key concerns or worries with visiting family over the holidays or kind of with break? And if you're an ally, also feel free to respond. If you want to just note ally at the beginning of your response, and then kind of note what are maybe some of your worries or concerns for those in the community who you're trying to support. So yeah, go ahead. I'll kind of just read them aloud as we go. And Michael, feel free to jump in and comment too, and then we'll kind of dive into the presentation. So, but really want to hear from you guys first and kind of what's on your mind or where you're at. Political conversations. Yes, that absolutely makes sense, especially with where we're at. The election's scary, my family's supportive, but if the president continues not to be, things could get a lot worse. Absolutely, yeah. With our current president and just the history of a lot of the LGBTQ protections he's kind of tried to take away. Very much understandable. Yeah. Other things too. How to address them asking if I have a boyfriend, being unsure of whether or not I want to come out to them. Yeah, totally. So being a little unsure, maybe ambivalent, maybe what the best way to go about it is, or kind of what you're wanting out of it, or how to react. Yeah, any comments, Michael? Go ahead.
Yeah, and just that's a wonderful question. These are all wonderful things to bring to the table, and hopefully we'll begin to address some of these throughout the presentation.
Any other responses to it? I'd love to give it maybe another minute or two. Scared about talking to parents about their political choices and how they affect me and my community. Yeah, totally. I know that's, I'm not, I'm an ally, not necessarily part of the LGBTQ community, but I know I've experienced a lot of family division through this as well. So having a topic come up after my family has ignored it since I've come out. It's been almost a year, so, oh yeah. So even if you are out and kind of stated those things, it sounds like their response just to kind of ignore and have a cold shoulder has been rough.
Yeah, can definitely be hard to manage some of those experiences when, you know, we're coming into our own experiences of being out and being integrated into our community, and our parents or maybe our family, our home community continue to just kind of adapt by ignoring it. And that's a really hurtful, invalidating thing to experience. Yeah.
Anything else? I'll give it maybe like another 40 seconds or so, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. How to create a safe space for someone who's in an awkward situation, a family event. I don't want to be a bystander and make things more uncomfortable. Okay, yeah. So how to kind of intervene in the moment when maybe you see something kind of happening, or that someone might be uncomfortable or feel unaffirmed. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Give it just maybe like 15 more seconds and then we'll move on. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. If there are other answers, feel free to submit. We might be able to come back to them later if we have time. But thanks for contributing thus far. I really appreciate it. So, and then here's just kind of the next question. So again, if you want to, whether you're identifying as an LGBTQ identified individual, or whether there's an ally, how have you guys all been able to kind of navigate these difficult contexts in the past? Have you found certain things helpful? Kind of curious what has been helpful, and definitely kind of to guide our conversation as we dive into the presentation. So having an ally who's right there, who is supportive of the community identity, absolutely. Anything else that's been helpful? We'll give it about 45 seconds or so, and then we'll dive into that presentation.
Previously approaching people with, where they're at in terms of acceptance and working from there. It's been more challenging to have calm and neutral conversations during this year. Absolutely.
So it sounds like kind of gauging where they're at with that, and then trying to build on that. Absolutely. I've always just tried to be my most authentic self and set clear boundaries out loud with others, venting with other LGBTQ plus individuals. Yeah, excellent. Awesome.
Yeah. We'll be getting into that kind of community social support aspect too, and that you're kind of already kind of preemptively highlighting some really important stuff that we're going to get at. Absolutely, yes.
I'll give it about maybe 25 more seconds, then we'll kind of dive in, if that's okay. Any other things people have found helpful? Cool. Again, thanks for the contributions, everyone. Definitely good to kind of hear from you where you're at and what you have all experienced. So I'll go ahead and transition out of Mentimeter, and then we're going to go ahead and just transition to the slideshow we had real quick. So give me one moment just to pull that up real quick. Sorry, 1 second, guys. Technology. It's fun. And there we go. Okay. Come back. I'm just about to start sharing my screen. There we go. Okay. So yeah, so kind of fitting what you all have been kind of asking with the presentation, we really want to kind of highlight and talk about resilience and safety, both as someone who may identify as LGBTQ+, as well as for allies and what they can kind of do. So Michael's actually going to start off and kind of walk us through just stress and kind of how we react to it biologically and physiologically, and kind of how to address that, what that means. And then I'll kind of take the tail end of the presentation and talk about what maybe things to consider if you're debating coming out or having some of these conversations, things to consider, ways of building in safety and resilience as we're approaching these home environments, and as well as resources for allies and advocates and what they can kind of do with that. So yeah, so we'll go ahead, if you want to go ahead and start off, Michael. And this is just the check-in for Mentimeter. I had 4 questions, but they only gave me 2 free ones, so I had to kind of combine them. But thanks for your contributions with that. It was appreciated. And then, yeah, I'll give it to Michael.
All righty, everyone. So I do want to just take some time to orient you all didactically to ways to understand stress and our stress responses, particularly with relationship to queer identity, right? And the first thing that I always like to do with anybody experiencing a lot of stress is really normalize that experience. So I don't want to take a whole lot of time away from the practical piece, but I do want to orient you a little bit to this. So the first thing that I want us to recognize is that there are really normal experiences to abnormal events. And although those experiences may be really uncomfortable, really distressing, they are indeed normal. And so during really profoundly stressful events, you may notice that you begin to have emotional reactions like feeling anxious, worried, fearful, or lonely, right? You can see some of those in the left column. And in addition to that, there are other normative responses that we have in our bodies, right? Or thoughts, right? We might have difficulty concentrating. We might have unwanted or unpleasant thoughts. And we may have bodily sensations that are uncomfortable, like having muscle tension and aches and pains, headaches, difficulty sleeping. And all of these things can kind of perpetuate in their own way that stress response. And so what I really want you to take away from this slide is that if you're feeling these sorts of things, those are normal responses to abnormal stressful events, okay? So let's look at stress a little bit more in depth. Look, can you go to the next slide? Okay. So here I have just a very simple diagram, and in this diagram, you see that stress is divided into 2 different categories. One of those categories is what's called eustress, or positive stress. And the other category is called distress. And generally speaking, we can think of that type of stress as a more negative, maladaptive experience of stress. Now, what I want you to take away from this slide is that stress in and of itself isn't a bad thing. Stress, like many of our emotions, orient us to what our needs are. And when we're within a normal range of stress, it can actually be adaptive. And so when we're looking at that eustress, this is that positive experience of stress. An example may be relevant to students is this. Imagine if you had a test coming up in a week or 2 weeks, or a paper that you had to write, and you had no response to that looming deadline to orient you to action. Well, you probably wouldn't be really pressed to engage in anything that's going to help us achieve that task, right? However, if I have a little bit of stress about that looming deadline, that stress might motivate me towards action. And that action in this case might be studying, right? That's adaptive. Studying or writing a little bit for my paper is going to help me achieve the goal of getting that assignment that I need to do accomplished, right? However, sometimes we can be overcome by stress. To be sure, different people have different levels or different constitutional abilities to handle stress. Some people can handle more, some people can handle less. And the take home is that when we have way too much stress, that's when we begin to go into the realm of distress, or that maladaptive experience of stress. Now, this maladaptive experience of stress can be experienced, broadly speaking, in one of 2 ways. It can be experienced acutely, or it can be experienced chronically. An acute experience of stress is something broadly you can think of as having a beginning and an end to that stress, right? You will eventually exit out of it, right? I'll give you a personal example. For me, applying for internships was a very, very stressful experience, right? And it had a beginning and an end, such that once I was done applying, I could experience a sense of, comfort now that that stress was gone. However, sometimes there isn't a clear beginning or an end to stress. Let's take COVID, for example. There's not really a clear endpoint in sight. And if you're like me or other people that I've talked to, COVID might be this thing that's really stressful for you, or bringing out a lot of feelings of fear, a lot of feelings around, am I going to be safe? Is my family going to be safe? And those, understandably, are extremely stressful experiences to have. And when we don't have any kind of end in sight, we may be in that space of distress for a prolonged period. And that's important because our bodies aren't really designed to stay in that prolonged experience of stress. And when we are, that can have negative effects on, of course, our mental health, but also our physiological health as well. Okay, so broadly speaking, I want you to understand this experience of stress. One, understand that it's not always a bad thing, but two, that it can be. And three, when it is prolonged, that can have deleterious effects on our mental health and our physical health, okay? So let's talk a little bit about how we experience manageable stress. Luke, can you go to the next slide? So I want to talk about the window of tolerance, okay? In the window of tolerance, you can think about that as that sweet spot, right? That is the spot where where our resources that we expend to handle stress are not being strained. And that's where we're experiencing that productivity. However, again, when we experience way too much stress that we can handle, we might fall out of that window of tolerance and we can become hyper aroused, right? That might be when our fight or flight is activated, or conversely, if stress becomes way, way too much for us to handle and fight or flight is no longer sufficient to handle it, we might go to a last line of defense, and that's to freeze. And that's that hypo arousal, okay? And the idea is that we want to find that window of tolerance. And again, that's gonna look different for every single person, and it's going to take into account your environmental, contextual experiences, as well as your predispositions and constitutional ability to be able to manage stress. And that's going to look different for everybody. But broadly speaking, that's where we're trying to stay. We're trying to stay within our window of tolerance so that stress can be used adaptively rather than having these harmful maladaptive effects. So let's go to the next slide and talk about some unique stressors that queer identified people are going to experience. Okay, so on top of those general stressors that we have, there's also this idea of minority stress. And this might be something that some of you are familiar with. And it can be a little complicated, but I want to try and condense it so that it makes sense. Broadly speaking, minority stress is a way for us to understand the unique experiences of stress that people with marginalized identities, in this particular instance, queer identified people, experience that lead to disproportionate mental health issues from that of heterosexual people, right? And we can divide up minority stress into two processes. Distal processes, which can be understood as those objective experiences in our culture, for example, experiencing prejudice or violence that extend from one's perception of our identity, whether or not we actually identify that way, right? And proximal processes. And those proximal processes can be understood as the internal way that we experience our identity. And that can comprise, one, the expectations of rejection that we might experience that extend from our marginalized identity as queer. Two, are maybe the tendency that we feel or the need that we feel to conceal our identity for safety concerns, right? That might feel really distressing because we can't express our full experience or something that might be really salient to us, to our communities. And three, the internalized anti-queer messages that or rather the anti-queer messages that we may internalize. For example, if we're being given messages that it is inappropriate for people assigned male at birth to express themselves femininely, or people who are assigned female sexed at birth to express themselves masculinely, I may have internalized that message and be really rigid with my gender expression, even if that's not necessarily congruent with how I actually experience my gender. And that can lead to a lot of those feelings of distress, right? So the way that we understand that is, on top of all of these other stressors that we have, the general stressors of our lives, family, COVID, school, queer identified people also have this unique experience of stress that combines with these to exacerbate our experiences. So if you are in this meeting today and experiencing a lot of distress, what I want you to take from this is that there's a lot of reasons that we might be experiencing distress, and that is normal, right? It is normal that with everything we as queer identified people in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of managing school in the pandemic, might be experiencing some increased distress, right? And that is normal, okay? So let's try putting some of this together. Luke, can you go to the next slide? I want to attune you to a theory of understanding our stress response, and that's what's called Polybagel Theory, okay? And I have some notes. Polybagel Theory was developed by a person named Dr. Stephen Porges. I don't know if I'm saying his last name right. Bear with me. Dr. Stephen Porges. Okay, Luke, I don't know if you know how to say that name properly, but in any case, that's the name of the guy, okay? And this helps us better understand our stress reaction and kind of the steps in how we begin to respond to stressful events. But basically, this incorporates a part of our physiology called the vagus nerve, and it's referred to as the wandering nerve in Latin. And it's one of the longest nerves, and is a cranial nerve that originates in the brainstem, and innervates the muscles of the throat, circulation, respiration, digestion, and elimination. So it's really, really connected to the parts of our autonomic nervous system that are implicated in that fight, flight, and freeze response. So the vagus nerve is a major constituent of the parasympathetic nervous system, and 80% of its nerve fibers are sensory, which means that the feedback is critical for the body's homeostasis, okay? So let's break down what that means in plain language without getting too much in the biology of it. Basically speaking, when we experience a stressful event, our body turns to its first most adaptive line of defense, and that's social engagement and connection. We may reach out for help. We may cry out for people to come and give us some support. And if people respond to that bid for connection, we may be able to find that homeostasis, right, and reduce our stress. And as social creatures, this is a normal process, right? This is kind of a normal built-in biological process that we typically engage in, right? However, if we reach out for help and people don't respond, right, or they don't respond in a way that's helpful, distress may continue to increase, and our arousal might increase, as you see on the left side of this diagram. At that point, our body goes into its second line of defense, and that is that autonomic sympathetic activation, which is the fight or flight response. So in a fight response, we may have or experience certain emotions like anger, irritation, frustration, and rage, and that is orienting our bodies to try and fight whatever that threat is, right? Conversely, we may also go into flight mode, right? And we may experience feelings like panic, fear, anxiety, and worry. And that's prepping us to run away from whatever it is, right? However, if that second line of defense fails and we are trapped and there's no way for us to get rid of the threat or escape the threat or fight the threat, our body goes into its last line of defense, its most primitive line of defense, right? And that's the freeze response. And associated experiences of that freeze response might be shame, shutdown, feelings of hopelessness. You may feel as if you're going numb or disassociated or disconnected from reality. You may feel helpless and trapped, right? These may feel like common experiences that you've had, and that's your body trying to keep itself alive, right? Especially when there feels like there's no escape, right? That's what our body's trying to do. It's trying to maintain its energy so that we can stay alive, right? Now, this is a really adaptive system, especially in the early parts of our evolution when we had to do things like run away from tigers. Don't ask me why in these examples we're always running away from tigers. I don't know, but that's how it's always presented, right? But we can imagine if we are confronted with some sort of predator or threat in our early evolution, these responses are adaptive to help us survive, right? Nowadays, we're probably not encountering wild animals in the woods and maybe in the way that we would have in earlier parts of our development in our evolution, right? However, this is still a really automatic process that happens in everybody, and it will activate at any sign of threat. And the thing is that it is not well connected with our prefrontal cortex, the logical part of our mind, right? It's happening in a more automatic way. And it takes time for this system to communicate with our prefrontal cortex to actually evaluate whether or not what we're experiencing is a threat. Your body may experience the subtle nuance or shift if someone's facial expression is a threat. And depending on your contextual experiences, this may activate. As queer people, we may experience hypersensitivity to that rejection, given potentially the experiences of rejection and violence that we've had across our lives and our family of origins and in our communities, right, throughout our lives. Our body's going to be really sensitive to nonverbal and verbal cues that other people may be communicating that might communicate that rejection. And our body's polyvagal system may activate to keep us alive, right? Now, that threat may be legitimate or it may not be there. However, this system is going to respond either way, unless we have ways to help it communicate with our prefrontal cortex and actually evaluate whether or not we're in the midst of a threat. But as you can imagine, the various type of stressors that we've experienced as queer people across our lives may sensitize us in a really profound way to assess for threat in interpersonal interactions. And this may be something that you experience at home as you're reconnecting with family, with your communities, outside of the university, in our spaces that are affirming here. Okay, so let's kind of put that all into a bow. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. So I really love this comic. If any of you know who Adam Ellis is, I like Adam Ellis's comics. Check him out if you don't know him already. But I often use this exact type of image as a metaphor for stress, right? So tying it all together, let's understand a little bit about that window of tolerance and how our arousal might continue to rise if we keep being piled on with stress. So as you see in the little comic here, Adam's little cartoon character is holding regular anxiety in a ball, right? And he's looking pretty happy. He's able to hold that ball. He's got one ball, two hands. He can hold that pretty easily. We see that he's still in his window of tolerance. He's looking pretty pleasant, right? Now, look over to the next panel to your right. We're giving him some COVID anxiety. And he's looking a little bit more worried, but he still has two hands and two balls. He can still hold that pretty easy, right? Maybe he's still within his window of tolerance and can still manage that stress such that it's adaptive and not maladaptive. However, as we look to the bottom right slide, Adam's little cartoon character is being handed another ball of stress, and that's the election anxiety. Well, we can see in this example that Adam's hands are already full. So he's going to have to do some balancing acts to try and manage that stress. And he's looking a little bit worried, right? And as we go to the last panel on the bottom right-hand side, we see all of these balls of stress being piled onto cartoon Adam, and he's looking really, really worried, right? And this little ball here at the end that says, teens were mean to me on TikTok because I'm too old for the app, we can maybe replace in this particular example with minority stress, right? So look at Adam, he's looking really worried. He's got his hands full and he's still getting piled on these stress balls. this is kind of a good example of what it looks like when stress keeps piling on. We can manage some of it, but as it continues to get piled on, we lose our ability to balance it, right? And we become weighed down by all of the stress, and we enter into that outside of that window of tolerance and into our distressed state. And for queer identified people, we have the added piece of our queer identity and the way that the world sociopolitically, sociohistorically responds to it. That's going to add this whole other layer that isn't there for people who don't identify as queer. This is going to be even more exacerbated as we bring in other parts of our intersectional identities, our social class, our ability status, our racial ethnic identity, so on and so forth, right? So, as we see, right, there's a lot of things that we're juggling right now. And what I really want to kind of communicate with this is some self-compassion for how we maybe are experiencing this, because we all might be in the bottom right hand panel in this moment. So if you're feeling really overwhelmed and you're holding 10,000 balls of stress, that makes sense, okay? So now I want to turn it over to Luke, now that we kind of have a conceptual idea of how we experience stress adaptively and maladaptively and how our body responds to stress, and start talking about ways to navigate that.
Yeah, cool. And Michael, feel free to kind of jump in as we go. But
Definitely.
so yeah, I wanted to include this first slide here. So just maybe things to consider if you're maybe debating coming out or having conversations around that with family when you're back home for break. Or as some of you guys even mentioned, even if it's you've already had some of that conversation, you're kind of maybe going to revisit it. First of all, I just want to say, like, it's not fair that anyone has to kind of think of these things in the background. It shouldn't have to be your burden. You have to go through all this. And I also want to note, again, my own limitations with my own identities, but these are kind of pulled from the science of what's been shown to be helpful in these situations. So I won't read all of them aloud, but just to highlight a few, definitely draw on like your previous experiences. And it seems pretty intuitive, right? Kind of seeing how things went in the past and adjusting. Also note, is it your decision to tell someone, or do you feel coerced? Do you feel pressured? How's that weighing on you and pushing you? Along with that, I think the social support piece is really, really big. And I'll touch on that a bit later, but I'll come back to it. I also want to really just be mindful of your own emotional energy capacity, right? These are stressful, bizarre times. Doing school virtually because of COVID. The election is, I mean, literally upon us. There's a lot of places we're feeling that stress, feeling that overwhelm. And so sometimes maybe it's just, maybe only have the emotional energy to kind of just take care of yourself and to kind of get through it yourself, right? So be thinking of that, you know, your own emotional energy. Are you able to kind of protect yourself? Can you also maybe try to have like patience and compassion in these other conversations, just because that can tend to help the conversations go better at times. Again, not that it's fair that you're required to do that, but that it can be helpful. Try and gauge like how might the person react, how they reacted to maybe other small comments when the topics come up, right? It's also important to consider like what are the possible consequences. So for some of you in school, or parents helping with college, that's going to be something that may affect your decision making, and you might feel kind of coerced to maybe not say anything because you don't want to maybe lose that very legitimate line of funding that's keeping your academic career alive, right? I also think the last, second to last point there, just having someone trusting and supportive, maybe who knows you're going in to have a conversation like this, maybe who could even go with you if they're there. But if not that, even who's someone you can kind of talk to right afterwards and debrief and kind of process how it went, can be really, really helpful. So again, we'll send the slides to you all later so you can re-review these. I just wanted to kind of throw them out there and cover them real quick. This is also a topic where I wish that we had 2.5 hours to present, but unfortunately we have the limit of time that we have. So I wish we could go more in depth. But so yeah, so now let's talk about like strategies for building resilience and seeking safety, right? So what do we kind of do with this? What are actual steps beyond just thinking about factors related to maybe having these conversations? So so on one hand, finding safe spaces, right? So maybe ensuring your home and family is safe and positive. If they're not, maybe that means you may have to conceal that identity. But even if the topics that are brought up or the kind of context is hostile or unsafe, maybe having kind of a backup plan there. So maybe finding someone. So for a lot of you, maybe if you're going back to hometowns for break with family, do you still have friends in the area? Do you have a neighbor you can trust who's supportive and affirming? A relative you can stay with? Just to have that there in case things get unsafe, in case things get really tense, being able to kind of take that space and be with someone else where it is more supportive and affirming, just to get that immediate safety. So it might be something to maybe look into maybe prior to going home if you're anticipating that, kind of to have that set up for when you get in that context, right? So connect this with others. This is huge. Man, what a year it's been with 2020. What a bizarre context we're in, right? But we do have each other still, and you do have each other in our community, and just what a great resource to lean on. They've been doing some like really big comprehensive studies in psychology just around depression and anxiety, and kind of what factors help people the most to deal with depression and anxiety, which are two really big mental disorders, right? And what they found, that one of the best things you can have is social support, is having close others who you can connect with on a vulnerable and intimate level. So really, I think the most important piece is like immediate safety of location, but then the next most important piece is just finding those others you can connect with, right? So individuals you may be able to go to in that context. Is there a family member who is affirming, who you've had that conversation with? Is that someone you can go to in these moments of maybe discord with other family members, right? Also, stay connected with each other. I know it's already a bizarre year because we're not face-to-face, everything's kind of virtual, but really try to use those other skills, whether it's Zoom, whether it's texting, whether it's TikTok or Snapchat, whatever that might be, stay connected. So yeah, I also would say too, a lot of you might be going to smaller hometowns, maybe more in conservative areas, and yet there may be some sort of local LGBTQ community that could be a start of a new social network in that context as well. And then again, that can also play into maybe finding places to stay that are safe, that are affirming. So people who live there, who are in that community, who may kind of know of those resources and other things that can be helpful there, get connected in that local level. So yeah, and then I'll also say too, you can also connect online, right? So things like the Trevor Project, 24/7 chat or call, you can totally take up that resource. For allies, there's also PFLAG, right? So that's a great resource if you're an ally and kind of curious about how to get involved and be supportive. And I'll also say for our allies, check in on your LGBTQ friends during break. Maybe let them know you'll be checking in, ask if that'd be needed or helpful, and kind of those regular check-ins, just see how they're going. Oftentimes when we're in distress, again, we can have that freeze response. Like Michael said, we may feel kind of paralyzed and crippled, but having another friend initiate or reach out for support can be really, really crucial as an ally. So I'd really encourage you guys to consider that. And then of course there's self-care, right? And again, it's difficult given our context, but a biggest thing too, this is something we bring up all the time in therapy, is just always being mindful of your basic needs. Sleep, food, energy level, water, all of those things can just really affect us. And we may not even be aware that maybe we didn't address those. And when we can get distressed and freeze and then fight or flight, we can tend to neglect our basic needs because we're in survival mode. So really try to make an effort to keep track of those. Also say with there's a lot of strategies for emotional self-care. And here's where I wish we could spend a lot of time and practice, but there's just a lot to get through. So relaxation exercises, mindfulness is just a huge crucial thing. I know some people have a love-hate relationship with it, but it can be shown to be really good for calming, de-stress, and taking care of your emotional health, giving you kind of that break. Also finding ways, if there's a lot of negativity, unaffirmation around you, find ways to experience other positive emotions, whether that be through other people or activities. Strive to maybe feel empathy, compassion, forgiveness, joy, and gratitude, just because that can be a really great kind of coping thing and just really help also kind of decrease a lot of the stress you may feel. So also just hobbies in general, time. And then I would also say not only hobbies, but time away. If you're spending 24 hours a day with your family in a house, despite the fact that it can be really cold outside, just get some time away. Maybe that means shutting the door in your bedroom and just having alone time. Maybe that means going on a walk, having some peace and quiet just on your own. Maybe that means going out, to a store, to a restaurant by yourself. Whatever that is, there's a old saying I've always heard: for every 24 hours you spend with someone, always try and have an hour to yourself, just to have that balance, to find that peace. And also that can give you a chance to kind of collect yourself, check in with yourself. And it can be really hard to do that when we're in social contexts, especially if they're charged. So I'll say with all of this, it's not an exact science, everyone. We are all coming from different experiences, some who've had more rough experiences or more debilitating experiences. we're all in different current contexts. We all have different sort of identities and expressions, and we all have different contexts we're about to head into at home. There's just so many variables here at play. So flexibility is really key. Again, it's not exact science. So it often can become a, let's try a lot of things and really find out what works for us. And everything I'm presenting is just kind of what the science has been shown to be usually most helpful in these contexts, but do adjust it, do be flexible, find your kind of own way of going about it for sure. So yeah, let's talk about being an ally now. And I remember there was a question earlier kind of about when you see someone in an awkward situation, you don't want to be a bystander, right? You want to do something. So I wish I could address that question more specifically. And I, again, wish we could really get into this subject in more detail, but here are a couple general ideas to maybe get you started. So step one, right? Continue to learn and grow in the issues and the awareness and the experiences, right? It's sort of a never-ending journey there. If you want to take that to the next level, you can register for safe space trainings. Even though we're not meeting in a space like that would usually go, there's still a lot of great resources and education along that process about what creating that safe space may look like. So I have the web link for that at the end in the resources section if you guys are really want to take it to the next level and get more hands-on practice there. There's other ally-related training seminars too. PFLAG has a lot of them they offer, so I encourage you to look into that too. And even just a simple web search will show a lot of things as well. So that also, I think a really great way of doing this too is there's so much doom and gloom often in social media, but to be sure maybe that we're following and elevating those LGBTQ plus individuals on social media, following them across time, hearing of their experiences can really help give us that perspective that maybe as an ally, if you're not in the community, really can help bring that understanding and that understanding about how to best support those in the community, right? And then along with that is just continuing to grow in your own awareness of yourself. The assumptions we all have, the biases, prejudices we all have these limited perspectives we're operating from based on our own experiences. So continue to be open and grow and be receptive to those and also seek those out, right? But then again, there's the key piece, right, is advocacy. How do we advocate in the moment? If I see someone in an awkward situation, what can I kind of do for them, right? So there's a lot of things here. Again, I'm just gonna cover a couple basics. So I think maybe starting with making your ally advocacy stance known. Right, with your friends, maybe if it comes up in conversation, sending people a group text like, hey, I really want to be an ally and advocate. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I want to kind of grow in this area, right? Let people know you are an ally explicitly. They may not sort of assume or put that together on their own. So again, I think this is really crucial, especially for break. Periodically check in on your LGBTQ friends, offer that support. Again, with that freeze response, we want to make sure we're reaching out and being as supportive as we can. So. Also, so this can be a tricky thing too, but when you notice people using unaffirming or harmful language, or if they're referencing some stereotypes, it can often be really hard to like the idea of having to have a conversation. But yeah, so do take that step of correcting that. I have a resource that's in the end section that'll kind of walk you through strategies of what to say, how to do it in a peaceful way, and yet also being able to kind of make that impact you want. So I think a great point is challenging the behavior, not the person. So noting like, hey, when you do that, when you say that, it kind of makes me feel this way, or I feel like it wouldn't be it could be really harmful or unsupportive to this person or that person based on these experiences, right? Call out the behavior. If you attack the person, often they can get really defensive and aggressive, even if they deserve it, which they probably do, but still we want this to go well. So try to challenge the behavior, not the person, right? Also really challenge them to like think for themselves. So instead of maybe just telling them, hey, that's right or wrong. Hey, like, how do you think, someone who is, gay would respond to that if you said that? Like, how do you think they'd be impacted by that? And that can often really make people kind of look inward and kind of reevaluate. For a lot of people, they maybe just be saying something and they don't really know the harm that they're doing because they've just been inundated or inoculated to it just based on their experiences. I know this is an experience I've had in the past that I've been challenged on. I'm so thankful I did. But I grew up in a neighborhood in a context where that was, everyone's, if something was bad, we'd call it gay, right? And that just became part of my verbiage, and not knowing anyone in the community when I was young, I didn't really realize the harm it was causing until it slipped out and I got called out on that. And that's something I remember, and I'm thankful that it's happened. I really do want to seek to kind of instill that same thing in others, not only just for protecting those in the community, but for that person's benefit too, to grow and realize what they're doing. Also say you can use facts, right? The scientific literature is overwhelmingly just showing how, as the minority stress model that Michael went through, right? Just the amount of stress and the amount of damage that's been done to the community and how that affects people. It's very real, it's scientific, right? So use those facts and be firm with that. Like, no, this is not okay. Like when you do that, like, how does that make other people feel? I know people who've experienced that and had this bad experience, right? So use those facts and be firm, and yet also still try to kind of maintain a sense of patience and relatableness, right? As they may just have not been exposed to this. So I also say to use social media, right? And not even just to plug these issues, but to elevate and kind of maybe retweet LGBT voices. So unfortunately with social media, you know, let's take, for example, maybe your parents, right? They may be following other people their same age, from their same hometown, within their same religion. We can tend to silo and bubble ourselves in social media. But as an ally, you may be able to pierce into that and then kind of advocate and bring up those LGBTQ voices when they may not have been exposed or be seeking those out on their own. So I think it's really important to elevate the voices in the community. So, and then again, if you see something, if there's any actual bullying, discrimination, stereotyping, stuff like that happening in the moment, intervene. I remember one of you said something about being a bystander, right? We don't want to do that at all. When you see it happening, call it out, get others to help, whatever you kind of need to do that, but just don't let it continue, right? So yeah, and I'm sorry, my Zoom panel is covering the next point. So that's the other thing too, is get involved in the community, in advocacy organizations. This isn't something you have to do alone, and you have to kind of figure out on a case-by-case basis. Join with others. It's a great resource when you don't know what to do, or if you freeze in a situation where you want to advocate. Being able to sort and process that out and get tips and strategies can be really helpful. So really get connected and involved in those communities. So, all right, so we actually have an activity to kind of wrap up with because we do want this to be useful and helpful for you all moving forward. So if everyone could get a pen and a paper, it's just something you guys will kind of do on your own, self-guided. Also feel free to pull up a web document if you want to just kind of type straight into it. And we're going to kind of just brainstorm and think about how do we create a personal resilience plan? What might that look like? So, so yeah, I want you to kind of ask yourself as an LGBTQ identifying person, kind of ask yourself these 5 questions and answer them. Feel free to give kind of a couple answers, right? So what helps get you through hard times? What are the unique challenges you've had to face in that process? So kind of think of your own context and experience and what have been unique challenges or barriers within that that have maybe contributed to those hard times, and have just so, yeah, be mindful of those challenges and kind of explicitly able to note those out. And then in addition, kind of answer, what do you need to kind of thrive and feel good about yourself and your life? So there's 5 things we'll kind of answer. I'll start with these 3 though. I don't want to overwhelm you all. So go ahead and take like maybe 1 or 2 minutes and kind of write those out and answer that for yourself. And then we're going to build on this in the next step here too. Michael, I apologize. I didn't really give you a gap to jump in or contribute if you wanted to, but I just kind of got to roll. Anything you want to say or contribute?
Beautiful. No, I loved everything that Luke said. And if you recall, right, when we kind of primed you with the theory, this all falls in line with that polybagel theory that we pointed out, right? Remembering our first line of defense is that social connection, and I cannot emphasize that enough. And this exercise will kind of help us identify kind of those first line of social connection defenses that we have before we even get into those second and third lines of defenses. So yes, absolutely.
Oh, perfect. Brian, I just saw you putting the links in the chat. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. So, on it. Yeah. Go ahead and spend another 1 or 2 minutes or so, and then I'll kind of put up the other 2 questions, and then we'll build on it. And I apologize. I wish we had more time, but it is what it is. We're going to make the best of what we have. So. Yeah. Actually, I'll go ahead and I'll just throw up all the questions so you can maybe spend more time on some of them. So along with the 3 I've just discussed already, also what are some of the internalized negative beliefs you have about yourself, about some of those identities, or just about LGBT identity in general. And then think of this question too. I know this could be maybe a frustrating question to think about, especially given like what day it is. But think about like, how does society have to change to support me more? I think for a lot of LGBTQ individuals, there's a sense that maybe they don't fit into society or something's wrong with them. But no, science would absolutely say something's wrong with society. A lot of people are aware of that, but also think about what would you need in society to help support you more. give you maybe like 2 minutes to kind of answer those as best you can. Feel free to jot down a couple things and then we'll build on it.
As provided, just a reminder, we will be sending this out to the organizers of this for you to have. And so if you don't find that you have enough time to think through this, that's okay. You'll get these questions and can think through them at a point where maybe you have a little bit more time if this doesn't feel adequate.
Give it about 1 minute if that's okay, and then we'll start to build on it. You can try and jot down a couple things for each section, or if you want to spend a little bit more time on one section or there's more to write, go for it too. Sorry, guys. There we go. Like maybe 40 more seconds or so. And could I ask Lizzie or Christy or Brian, are the participants able to also use chat at all?
They can use chat. They can just message myself as the host, and then I can field those to you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, so I did want to open that up, even as we're kind of approaching the end of this activity when we get there. If there are any additional specific questions, please feel free to send them to Lizzie or Christy if you'd like. They can pass them on to us. We'd love to be able to try and answer those when we have more time available. I'm also just going to take the time while you're still writing to plug the counseling center. If you know this is coming, it might be helpful maybe to meet with the counselor, maybe even just once before you go home to kind of be able to talk this out and plan it out. Maybe if you're looking for something a bit more long-term, just to kind of cope with this in general. We're here. We want to be a resource, so feel free to access that. Yeah, okay. So go ahead, hopefully it's some time to answer those. I know it's not a whole lot of time, but we'll go ahead and move forward and kind of build on this. So with everything you kind of looked at, I want you to go ahead and now just kind of identify or circle maybe the 3 most challenging threats to your resilience, as well as maybe what are your 3 most important resilience supports. When times get rough and that activation happens, what are the 3 things that you can really draw on pretty reliably that might be really helpful? This seems like a simple exercise, but we need to have awareness about this. We need to kind of talk this out and think this through. That way, when we get in these distressing moments, we'll kind of be able to draw from that, from what we've done previously. So go ahead and circle those. Yeah, what are the threats? What are the barriers to the resilience? And then what are the most important resilience supports? Give you a moment or 2 to think about that.
Just to kind of, as you're writing, right, to back up a little bit of what Luke's saying, if you do have time, if you don't have enough time to finish this, I really do encourage you to take some time to do it for yourself, simply because if we come back to that polyvagal theory, what we can understand from that is that when we're activated, right, as we said before, we don't really have a whole lot of access to that prefrontal executive functioning where we can think through really logically and in a kind of systematic way what we might need, right, when we're activated. And so already having that plan in place will be useful because you won't have to access that piece that you might need in the moment. It'll already be there done for you. So just to put that out there.
So yeah, so as you kind of identify what are the 3 biggest barriers and what are the 3 biggest supports, also kind of with that. So then kind of maybe turn the page over and then kind of think about like what supports do you still need that might not be there, that may be helpful for protecting from these threats to resilience. So again, we're identifying what we do have, what has been helpful, but also what else do we need? What would be helpful in these situations for these threats we're anticipating? And then also feel free to maybe write a little bit more about how to incorporate these more into your life. So maybe this is something you can come back to later once you can review the slides and kind of look at some of these tips in more detail, or look at other resources like the Trevor Project or PFLAG. Think about how to build those in your life a little bit more, have them kind of be a little more salient or reliable when those times come. So yeah. So yeah, I again, I apologize, wish we had more time. Feel like we had to kind of cram all this into a short time span. I hope this activity was helpful. As Michael said, I'd really encourage you to come back to it. In some ways, it's kind of like studying for maybe a test that we're anticipating, right? We want to have that knowledge before we kind of walk in and get in those situations. That way we can't access it when we kind of go into fight or flight mode. So I hope this was helpful. I'll also open up any other questions or any comments. I wish we had more time to go through that, but any questions or comments we can kind of address while we're still here. Okay, cool. If you guys do have other questions, feel free to again send it to Lizzie, Christy, or Brian, and you guys can totally feel free to pass that on to us. And yeah, we'd love to be able to answer and address those later if those come up. So yeah, any other questions or anything else, any other comments or anything before we kind of conclude? Cool. I'll also list this. This is a very short list, but kind of the main resources we drew from this presentation, from the science, as well as some more direct links to kind of help you kind of think about and walk through whether your strategies for being an ally, how to create a safe space, or even how to kind of come out to family and friends. So yeah, feel free to kind of draw on those too. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. I think with that, we really appreciate you all having us. I really enjoyed it. I'm really glad I got to kind of come in and talk about this. I hope it was helpful. And please feel free to reach out in the future if you guys need anything. And the UCC is totally there for you all to access if you'd like. So yeah, any other thoughts, Michael?
Nope, just remember, we're here for you. Like Lucas said, at the UCC, if you feel like you need to come in, we'll be there for you.